While my family was having dinner, I suddenly received a call from an unknown number. The woman on the phone said her name was Jessica, and she told me to pack my husband's bags by morning. The voice on the other end was young, confident. The kind of confident that only comes from sleeping with a married man who tells you his wife is nothing. I thought you should hear it directly from us, Jessica said, and her tone had the rehearsed sweetness of someone who had practiced this speech in a mirror. Robert will be moving into my place tomorrow morning. I hope you can be mature about this for everyone's sake. The speakerphone was on. She had made sure of that the number was unfamiliar, and I had answered the way I always answered unknown calls at dinner on speaker quick, expecting a robocall. My 13-year-old daughter heard every syllable. My 10-year-old son stopped chewing and looked at me with gravy still glistening on his chin. Neither child moved. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and rosemary, and that smell would follow me into my sleep for weeks. I set the phone face down on the table. Chloe, take your brother upstairs, please. Bring your plates. You can finish dinner in your room tonight. My voice did not crack. I know this because Chloe looked at me the way she always looked at me when I was frighteningly steady, wide eyes, closed mouth, the expression of a girl who understood that something enormous had just shifted beneath our house. She took Ethan's hand. The stairs creaked under their weight, the bedroom door clicked shut, and the house dropped into a silence so complete I could hear the kitchen faucet dripping. Robert put his fork down. He did not apologize. He leaned back, crossed his arms over his chest, and shrugged. This was going to come out eventually, Sarah. Jessica and I have been together 18 months. I was going to tell you myself, but she got ahead of me. He delivered this the way he discussed lab results with his patients, clinical dispassionate, already past the diagnosis, and moving toward treatment. Treatment in this case, meaning the disposal of 15 years of marriage. He looked at me like I was a subscription he was canceling. The couch, I said. That is where you sleep tonight. Tomorrow morning we talk about assets. He opened his mouth. The silver spoon clinked against the drying rack as I set it down with a clarity that closed every door in the room. He shut his mouth. He went to the living room. The couch springs groaned under his weight, and within the hour he was snoring. The man who had just detonated his own family fell asleep like a child after a long day. Before we continue, if you believe that a woman's sacrifice and devotion deserve to be honored, not thrown away like an old receipt, please consider subscribing to this channel. It is free, and it helps stories like this one reach more women who need to hear them. To understand what happened after that Thursday, you need to know who I was before. You need to understand the woman Robert decided was disposable and the life I had poured myself into, like water into a cracked vase, endlessly, without ever questioning where it all went. I met Robert when I was 24 at a charity fundraiser for a free clinic in downtown Denver. He was a second-year medical resident with $200,000 in student loans and a smile that made you believe he could save the world one patient at a time. I was fresh out of accounting school, working at a small firm near Colfax Avenue, and I thought he was the most earnest man alive. We married the following spring. I wore my mother's dress. He cried during the vows. That was the last time I saw him cry about anything that involved me. The early years were lean and real. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a radiator that clanged at 3 in the morning and a landlord who returned calls on his own schedule, which was never. Robert was building his practice, and I was building everything underneath it. I left my firm to manage his books because we could not afford a bookkeeper. Every evening after Chloe was fed and bathed and asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, reconciling invoices, filing insurance claims, and cross-referencing billing codes until 2 in the morning, while Robert slept in the next room. I did this without a paycheck. Not once did it occur to me to ask for one, because I believed we were constructing something together, and you do not invoice your own dream. Money was a word we whispered. I clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. I bought Robert's dress shirts at Goodwill and tailored them at the kitchen table so they looked new. I canceled my own dental appointments for 3 consecutive years so he could purchase an autoclave for the office. When Ethan was born, I returned to his quarterly tax filings 6 days after delivery because the IRS does not care that you have been in labor for 19 hours. Nobody asked me to do these things. Nobody noticed either. That was the shape of our agreement he earned I managed, and together we would rise. And we did rise. The practice grew. His name appeared on a brass plaque beside the office door on South Broadway. My name appeared nowhere, but his success had my fingerprints on every surface, and I told myself that was enough. The place I loved more than our house, more than anything we owned together, was the ranch. Robert's parents, Harold and Edith, owned 40 acres of mountain land outside Aspen, a log cabin they had built with their own hands in 1978. Every beam was hand-hewn. The dining table was a single slab of white oak that Harold had milled and sanded himself over the course of a summer. The bookshelves, the bed frames, the porch railing, all of it carried the grain and patience of their labor. When we visited, Edith would hold my hands across the oak table and say, "You are the anchor of this family, Sarah. You keep everything from drifting." Those words lived inside me like a second heartbeat. They meant more than every anniversary Robert forgot after year 8. I made him 5,400 cups of coffee. One every morning for 15 years, 2 sugars, a splash of cream in the blue ceramic mug I gave him our first Christmas. Each cup was a small daily vow, offered without thinking, received without thanks. I wonder now how many of those mornings he carried my coffee to his desk and texted her while the steam was still rising. One memory sits differently now than all the others. Last Thanksgiving. Robert told us he could not drive to Aspen because of a medical conference in Chicago. Chloe had been counting the days. Ethan wanted to fish the creek behind the cabin. I roasted a small turkey for 3 and told the children their father's work was important and that we would visit the ranch at Christmas instead. The conference in Chicago had a name and a face and a $300 French dinner on our wedding anniversary. I just did not know it yet. The signs were there, stacking up quietly like snow on a roof, and I was the last person in the house willing to look up. The first sign arrived 3 months before that Thursday dinner. I picked up Robert's iPad from the kitchen counter to check the forecast, a gesture so routine I could have done it in my sleep, and the screen demanded a passcode. He had never locked it. When I mentioned it that evening, he did not look up from his laptop. New security protocols at the clinic. IT required it. The explanation was clean, professional, airtight. I set the iPad down and started chopping onions for dinner. The sound of the knife on the cutting board was louder than the alarm I refused to hear. The second sign was the scent. A Friday in September, Robert came home from what he called a late patient consultation, and when he leaned down to kiss Chloe goodnight, I caught something on his collar that did not belong there. Not his usual Acqua di Gio, the same aftershave I had been purchasing since 2012. This was different, lighter, sweeter, the kind of fragrance a younger woman wears because she has not yet learned restraint. I ran his shirts through the wash that night and told myself the new receptionist at the clinic probably hugged everyone. The third sign spoke a language I understood better than anyone in that house: money. Every Tuesday, $500 in cash withdrawn from our joint checking account, consistent as a utility bill. I spotted the pattern because spotting patterns in numbers was what I had been trained to do, what I had done for Robert's practice for over a decade. When I mentioned it at dinner, his jaw tightened. "Sarah, you handle groceries and school supplies. I handle the practice. Networking in my field costs money that someone who stays home would not understand." He said it the way you explain a simple concept to a slow student patient, on the surface, contemptuous beneath. And I, the woman who had managed every dollar that built his career, apologized for asking about our own money. Martha did not apologize for anything. My older sister drove over for coffee one Saturday while Robert was at a seminar, and I made the mistake of mentioning the withdrawals. Martha set her mug down so hard the coffee sloshed across the counter. "Pull up the bank statements right now, Sarah. He is not networking. He is funding a second life." Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and it carried the authority of a woman who had survived her own husband's lies a decade earlier. She had earned the right to be blunt. I did not pull up the statements. Instead, I made Robert's favorite brisket that evening and asked gentle questions about his week. He was warm. He poured wine. He said, "I honestly do not know what I would do without you holding everything together." That sentence was so perfectly constructed, so precisely aimed at the part of me that needed to believe that I swallowed it whole. A man who says things like that does not betray you. Not after 15 years, not with children sleeping upstairs. The logic was clean and airtight, and it was a lie I told myself with the discipline of a professional. But evidence is indifferent to denial. A new gym membership he never mentioned. Weekend conferences that used to be family time. His phone migrating from the counter to his pocket screen, perpetually face down. Each detail was small enough to dismiss alone. Together they formed a shape I refused to trace. The night I almost woke up, the night that circled back to me at 3 in the morning for weeks, was the receipt. A Tuesday, laundry day. I found it folded into the inside pocket of his gray suit jacket. Le Petit Clos, a French restaurant on Larimer Street. Dinner for two. $300 even, dated October 14th, our wedding anniversary. The same evening, Robert had texted me at 7 to say the partners' meeting ran long and I should not wait up. I stood in the laundry room under the fluorescent light, holding that slip of paper, and my fingers understood before my heart did. They trembled. The receipt shook. I read the date 3 times. October 14th. I folded it. I slipped it into the pocket of my own coat by the back door. Then I carried his shirts upstairs, pressed them with the iron, and arranged them in his closet, white, light blue, gray, the order he preferred. I said nothing to Martha. I told myself it was a client dinner, a celebration, a business expense that only looked suspicious because I was being paranoid. The excuses I manufactured on his behalf had grown so thin I could see through them if I held them up to the light. But seeing through them meant seeing the end of everything I had built, and I was not ready to stand in that rubble. Not yet. But the receipt stayed in my coat pocket. Some part of me was already building a case. After the children were in bed that Thursday night, after Robert had been exiled to the couch and his snoring was vibrating through the drywall, I called Susan. My best friend for 11 years, a paralegal at one of the largest family law firms in Denver, a woman who could navigate a hard drive the way I navigated a balance sheet. She arrived at our back door at 11 with her laptop bag and a look on her face that said she had been expecting this call for months. Robert was unconscious. The man had just informed his wife of 15 years that he had been sleeping with a 25-year-old for a year and a half, and he was asleep within the hour. That detail, the ease of his sleep, the completeness of his indifference, would stay with me longer than anything Jessica said on the phone. His laptop was on the kitchen counter, lid open, still logged in. He had not bothered to close it because it never occurred to him that I would look. That was the core of Robert's miscalculation. He had spent so many years categorizing me as the woman who washed his shirts and filled his coffee that he forgot I was also the woman who had audited every financial record his practice ever generated. Susan did not need to break through any security. The email was open. The browser history was intact. His banking applications were still active. In the blue glow of that screen in the dark kitchen, where I had made him 15 years of dinners, I watched the architecture of my marriage collapse into a pile of evidence. The first file was a receipt from Tiffany and Company, a diamond engagement ring, $14,200, purchased 6 weeks prior, for a woman who was not his wife. My stomach clenched, but my hands did not stop moving. There was more. The second discovery was an email thread with a real estate agent named Craig Hollister discussing a luxury condominium on 17th Street. List price $850,000. Robert's plan, spelled out in cheerful sentences, was to withdraw $170,000 from our joint 401k retirement fund for the down payment. That fund represented 12 years of contributions, his and mine, earmarked for the children's education and our shared future. He was planning to hollow out our retirement to build a love nest. Susan reached over and squeezed my wrist. I kept scrolling. The third discovery was the one that killed something inside me and brought something else to life. A folder on his desktop, labeled with a meaningless string of numbers. Inside were photographs. Robert and Jessica intertwined on the hand-carved oak bed at the Aspen Ranch. Harold and Edith's bed. The bed where Robert's mother had given birth to him during a snowstorm in 1980 because the roads were impassable and the midwife could not get through. Below the photographs was a text conversation. Jessica had written, "This hillbilly furniture is hideous, babe. I am tossing all of it when we take over this place." Robert had replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "Just let me get rid of the stupid gatekeeper at home first, and it is all yours." Stupid gatekeeper. That was me. The woman who had driven 2 hours in January ice to help Edith preserve the cedar paneling. The woman who had cataloged every piece of handmade furniture for insurance purposes. The woman Harold trusted to manage the property taxes. I was the stupid gatekeeper. My knees went first. I slid off the kitchen chair and sat on the cold tile floor with my back against the cabinet, and I stayed there. The ceiling fan turned above me, slow and indifferent. Through the wall, Robert's snoring continued rhythmic as a metronome. Susan sat on the floor beside me and said nothing because there was nothing to say. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the tile to stop feeling cold. Long enough for the numbers on the microwave clock to change twice. Then something happened that I did not expect and cannot fully explain. The grief did not leave. It was still there, a stone on my chest, but a second presence rose up beside it. The part of me that had spent 15 years hunting for errors in spreadsheets, the part that could scan a column of 200 transactions and spot the single discrepancy in under a minute. That part looked at the laptop screen and saw something the rest of me was too shattered to see. It saw dates, dollar amounts, transaction records, a trail of financial fraud that any competent attorney would follow straight to a courtroom. I stood up. I plugged my USB drive into the port and copied every file, every email, every photograph, every bank record, every text message. When the transfer was complete, I closed the laptop to the exact angle Robert always left it placed, his coffee mug on top, precisely where it had been, and slid the USB drive into my coat pocket, next to the receipt from Le Petit Clos. Susan watched me with something that looked like awe and something that looked like fear. "He chose the wrong woman to steal from," I said. It was the first sentence I had spoken in nearly an hour. Dawn came pale and cold. Martha arrived at 6 with 2 coffees from the drive-thru and a legal pad she had purchased at a gas station on the way over. While Robert still slept on the couch, the man could sleep through his own apocalypse, my sister and I sat at the kitchen table and opened every joint account on my laptop. I had the login credentials for all of them because I had created every account, managed every payment, and reconciled every statement for 15 years. Robert had never memorized a single password. He never needed to. That was my job. What we found made Martha set her coffee down and go very still. Over the previous 8 months, Robert had withdrawn $35,000 from our joint savings account in increments carefully sized to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts, $800 here, $1,200 there, never more than $2,000 at once, scattered across ATM withdrawals and cashback purchases at locations I did not recognize. A gas station in Cherry Creek, a convenience store near an address I would later learn was 2 blocks from Jessica's apartment. Each withdrawal was a small, quiet cut made so frequently and so methodically that the account had bled nearly dry without setting off a single notification. The total sat on the screen in clean, merciless numbers, $35,000 of our family's savings, siphoned by the man sleeping 20 feet away to finance dinners, hotel rooms, gifts, and the lifestyle of a 25-year-old woman he planned to replace me with. Martha wrote the number on the legal pad and underlined it twice. "That is theft," she said. Plain and simple. At 7 that morning, Robert strolled into the kitchen with his suitcase and the particular expression of a man who believed he was in control of this situation. "My lawyer will be in touch about dividing things fairly," he said, adjusting his cuffs. He glanced at Martha with barely concealed irritation. "I assume your sister is here for moral support?" I placed the printed bank statements on the table between us. 12 pages. Every withdrawal highlighted in yellow. $35,000 has disappeared from our joint savings over the past 8 months without my knowledge or consent. That is fraud, Robert. I held up my phone, the keypad already showing 911. "You can transfer every cent back into this account right now using your phone while I watch." Or I press this button and explain to the police and then to the Colorado Medical Board how a licensed physician has been embezzling family funds to finance an affair. Your choice. You have 60 seconds. The color drained from his face, the way it drains from a photograph left in the sun. Martha stood behind me with her arms crossed. The kitchen was silent except for the clock. Robert looked at the statements, looked at my phone, looked at Martha, and the architecture of his arrogance crumbled in real time. His hand shook as he pulled out his phone. His fingers fumbled the pin twice before he managed to initiate the transfer. The confirmation appeared on my screen with a soft chime, that small, clean sound of $35,000 returning to where it belonged. Martha let out a breath she had been holding since she walked in. Robert left without his suitcase. He grabbed his keys and his jacket and walked out the front door, and he did not slam it, which told me everything about how frightened he was. Frightened, men closed doors carefully. That afternoon, I drove to a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building in Lodo and sat across from Evelyn Hayes, whose reputation as a divorce attorney preceded her the way thunder precedes lightning. I placed the USB drive on her desk and told her everything. Evelyn was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of this story and was no longer surprised by any of it. She inserted the drive into her laptop and scrolled in silence for 7 minutes. The 401k withdrawal he is planning, she said without looking up, requires your written consent under federal law. ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, mandates spousal signature for any distribution from a qualified retirement plan during marriage. He cannot touch that $170,000 without your name on the form. He knows this, which means he was planning to forge it or pressure you into signing. She closed the laptop. He will not get the chance. I am filing for a temporary restraining order under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 14-10-108, to freeze all marital assets. By the time he figures out what happened, every account, every investment, and every piece of property will be locked down. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, Mrs. Whitfield. And equity in this case is going to look very much like justice. The danger was not over. It lived in the margins of every interaction. 2 nights before I met Evelyn, while Robert was still in the house gathering clothes, I had been reviewing the bank statements at the kitchen table when his footsteps creaked on the stairs at midnight. My heart slammed into my throat. I swept the papers under the placemat, flipped open a cookbook to a random page, and was staring at a recipe for banana bread when he appeared in the doorway, hair mussed eyes half closed. "What are you doing up?" he asked. "Thinking about baking something for the kids," I said. He grunted, poured a glass of water, and went back upstairs. My hands did not stop shaking for 10 minutes. Another time Martha called while Robert was in the next room. I answered with a bright voice and said, "Oh, hi, Dr. Patel. Yes, Ethan's checkup is Thursday. Thank you for confirming." Martha understood immediately and hung up. We had become women who spoke in code, and the fluency came faster than either of us expected. The second week after that Thursday brought a gift I did not expect and did not deserve, delivered by a mistake that belonged entirely to Robert's own carelessness. Craig Hollister, the real estate agent handling the $850,000 condominium purchase, had been given our home address as the primary mailing address because it was the address on file for Robert, because Robert had never bothered to change it, because Robert assumed I would never open his mail. On Saturday morning, a FedEx envelope landed on my doorstep, containing the full purchase agreement for the downtown condo. Robert's signature. Jessica's signature. A projected closing date 6 weeks out. The document was so detailed, it included the floor plan, the HOA fees, and a handwritten note from Craig congratulating them on their beautiful new beginning. I drove to Aspen that afternoon, 2 hours on a 70 through the Eisenhower Tunnel, past the ski towns emptying out for the off-season. The ranch sat at the end of a gravel road lined with blue spruce, and the smell of pine and wood smoke hit me before I reached the front porch. Harold opened the door. Edith was behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel. They were in their early 70s, and they had been together for 48 years, and they loved me in the uncomplicated way of people who judge you by your labor and your loyalty. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I sat at the oak table, the table Harold had built the table where we had shared 15 Thanksgivings, and I placed the evidence in front of them. One manila envelope. Inside the real estate purchase agreement, the 401k withdrawal plan, and 4 photographs of Robert and Jessica at the ranch. On the bed, Edith had made by hand. In the cabin, Harold had built beam by beam. I included printed screenshots of the text messages, the ones where Jessica called their furniture hillbilly junk, and Robert called me the stupid gatekeeper. Harold read slowly. He held each page at arm's length because he was too proud to wear his reading glasses in front of company. Edith read over his shoulder, one hand gripping the back of his chair. The cabin was silent, except for the wood popping in the fireplace. When Harold reached the text messages, he set the pages down on the table with the deliberate gentleness of a man trying very hard not to break something. He looked at the photographs for a long time. His jaw worked. His knuckles went white around the edge of the table. "He brought that woman here," Harold said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel being dragged across stone. "He brought her into this house and let her call it junk. He let her lie on your mother's bed, Edith." He turned to his wife. Edith's face was a mask of something that went beyond anger. It was the expression of a woman whose son had desecrated something sacred, and the grief of that was worse than the fury. Harold picked up his phone with the steady hand of a man who had made decisions in worse moments. "I am calling Parker. The will needs to be updated by Monday. His name comes off. Everything goes into a trust for the grandchildren. Sarah manages it." Edith looked at me across the table with eyes that were wet and hard at the same time. "You are still the anchor," she said. "He never was." I drove home in the dark with the manila envelope on the passenger seat lighter, now by the weight of the copies I had left on Harold's table. The mountains were black shapes against a sky full of stars, and I did not turn on the radio. I did not need sound. Inside my chest, something that had been coiled for weeks was tightening into its final revolution, and I could feel the spring about to release. The following Sunday, 16 days after Jessica's phone call, Robert used his house key to let himself in at 9 in the morning. He had not called ahead. He walked through the front door with the swagger of a man returning to claim territory, wearing his best navy blazer and a cologne I did not recognize. Jessica was parked at the curb in a white sedan engine, running waiting. Robert set his briefcase on the kitchen counter and looked around the house with an expression that mixed ownership with contempt. "I am here to discuss a fair division of assets," he announced as though he were chairing a board meeting. "Jessica and I will be sending wedding invitations next month, so we should expedite this." I was sitting on the couch in the living room, knitting a scarf for Chloe. A cup of chamomile tea sat on the side table, still steaming. I did not stand up. I did not respond. The yarn moved through my fingers, loop after loop, steady as a pulse. The doorbell rang. Robert frowned and opened it. A man in a dark suit stood on the porch holding a leather folder. "Robert Whitfield," the man said. Robert nodded. The man extended the folder. "My name is James Calloway. I am a certified process server retained by the law offices of Evelyn Hayes. You are being served." Robert took the folder the way you accept a parking ticket with irritation and the absolute certainty that it would be a minor inconvenience. He tossed it onto the kitchen counter next to his briefcase and turned back to me with the patient, patronizing expression he used when explaining to waitstaff that his steak was overcooked. "Sarah, whatever your little lawyer has cooked up my attorney will have it dismissed by Wednesday. Let us skip the theatrics and talk about the house like adults." I continued knitting. Loop pull, loop. The yarn was a soft merino wool in Chloe's favorite shade of blue. I did not look up. James remained by the door. "I would recommend you review the documents before making plans for Wednesday, Mr. Whitfield." Robert rolled his eyes, flipped open the leather folder, and began to read. The first document was the divorce petition, filed in the District Court of Denver County, citing irretrievable breakdown of marriage, with a formal request for sole legal and physical custody of both minor children. His eyes moved across the first page quickly, dismissively, the way he skimmed pharmaceutical reports. Then he reached the section detailing grounds for custody, documented evidence of financial fraud, dissipation of marital assets, extramarital relationship conducted in the presence of the family home, and demonstrable pattern of deception over a period of 18 months. His reading slowed. His jaw tightened, but his voice was still steady when he looked up. Sole custody. He laughed a short, hard sound. On what basis I am a physician? I am the primary earner. No judge in Colorado is going to take my children away because of a personal matter between adults. This is laughable. Keep reading, I said without raising my eyes from the scarf. He turned to the second document, a certified copy of the temporary restraining order issued under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 14-10-108, signed by Judge Daniel Moreno the previous Friday. The language was precise and comprehensive. Robert was prohibited from transferring, encumbering, concealing, or withdrawing any marital assets, including and specifically naming the joint 401k retirement account held at Fidelity Investments, the joint savings account at First National Bank, and all equity in the family residence. The $170,000 he had planned to use as a down payment for the downtown condominium was frozen. Every dollar, every account, every plan he had made in the dark was now pinned under the bright light of a court order. The color left his face in stages like a tide going out. First the cheeks, then the lips, then the rest. His fingers gripped the edge of the counter, and for the first time since he had walked through that door, the swagger drained out of his posture. He stood a little smaller. His shoulders dropped an inch. "This is illegal," he said, but his voice had thinned. The certainty was gone. "You had no right to access my financial records. My lawyer will challenge every piece of this. Every document in that filing was obtained from jointly held accounts and shared devices." James replied calmly, "Your wife is a co-owner of every asset listed. The court found sufficient cause to issue the restraining order based on evidence of asset dissipation. You are, of course, entitled to contest the order at the hearing." Robert slammed the folder down. He turned to me with his face flushed red, his voice rising toward the register he used when he wanted to intimidate the voice that had silenced me at 100 dinner tables, the voice that had made me apologize for asking about our own money. "You think you are clever, Sarah. You think a part-time bookkeeper can outmaneuver a physician. I built everything in this house. Every dollar. Every brick. You were along for the ride, and now you want to pretend you are some kind of—" His phone buzzed on the counter. He stopped mid-sentence. The notification was an email, and his eyes flicked toward it out of habit, the way they always did because Robert had never been able to resist the pull of his own inbox. He picked up the phone. He read the subject line. His thumb hovered for 1 second, then he opened it. The email was from Parker & Associates, the law firm that had represented Harold and Edith Whitfield for 30 years. The language was formal, final, and merciless. Harold and Edith had executed an amended last will and testament, effective immediately removing Robert Allen Whitfield as a beneficiary of the family estate. All real property, including the 40-acre ranch, the hand-built cabin, and all structures on the Aspen land, along with all financial assets held in the family portfolio, had been transferred into an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of Chloe Ann Whitfield and Ethan James Whitfield. The designated trustee granted full fiduciary authority to manage, invest, and distribute trust assets on behalf of the beneficiaries was Sarah Elizabeth Whitfield. Robert read the email once. Then he read it again slower, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic if he gave them enough time. They did not. His hand dropped to his side. The phone slipped from his fingers and struck the hardwood floor with a sound that cracked through the silence of the kitchen's sharp final, like a gavel. He stared at the floor where the phone lay face up, Parker's email, still glowing on the screen. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His lips moved around a word, maybe dad, maybe no, maybe something that had no language, but whatever it was, it died before it reached the air. The man who had always had a deflection, an excuse, a charming exit strategy for every room he occupied, stood in the middle of the kitchen he used to own, with no script and no audience willing to believe him. His eyes were wet. His blazer chosen so carefully that morning hung on him like a costume from a show that had closed early. He looked at me the way a man looks at a locked door when he has just realized he threw away the key years ago and only now needs to get back inside. I set down my knitting. I stood up slowly, the way you stand, when there is no rush, because time finally belongs to you. I walked past him close enough that he could have reached for my arm, but did not, and stepped over his phone on the floor without glancing down. At the kitchen counter, I picked up his briefcase and held it out to him the way I had once held out his coffee every morning, with both hands steady without expression. "The $850,000 condominium," I said. My voice was level, quiet, the voice of a woman stating a fact that no longer concerns her. "I hope Jessica can cover the down payment on her own. Please leave your house key on the table before you go." He took the briefcase. He set the key beside the fruit bowl. He walked to the front door and pulled it shut behind him, gently, carefully, the way frightened men close doors they know they will never open again. Through the living room window, I watched the white sedan idle at the curb for a long moment before it pulled away. Jessica did not come inside. She did not honk. She simply drove, and Robert sat in the passenger seat of someone else's car, going to someone else's apartment, carrying a briefcase full of documents that told him in the precise language of the law that the life he had tried to steal had been taken back. I stood at the window until the street was empty, and the sound of the engine had dissolved into the neighborhood noise of sprinklers and birdsong. Then I walked back to the couch, sat down, picked up my knitting, and finished the row. The hearing took place on a Monday 6 weeks later in a courtroom on the 4th floor of the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse in downtown Denver. The room smelled like floor polish and old paper, and the fluorescent lights gave everything the pale, honest glow of a place where pretenses go to die. Robert arrived late. He walked in through those double doors with the careful posture of a man trying to project authority, but his appearance told a different story. His dress shirt was wrinkled, not the slight rumpling of a busy morning, but the deep creases that forms when fabric sits balled in a dryer for 2 days because no one is there to fold it. His suit jacket did not match his trousers. His tie was knotted unevenly, hanging a half-inch too long on the left. These were details I would not have noticed a year ago, but I had spent 15 years ensuring that every shirt in his closet was pressed, every tie was straight, every cuff was linked. The absence of that labor was written across his body in wrinkles and mismatched buttons, and every woman in that courtroom over the age of 40 could read the translation, "This man has no one taking care of him anymore, and he does not know how to take care of himself." His attorney, a junior partner from a firm I did not recognize, shuffled papers with the mechanical nervousness of someone who had reviewed the opposing counsel's evidence and understood the mathematics of this fight. There would be no surprises for the defense today, only damage control. Jessica was not in the courtroom. She was not in the building. She was not in Colorado. According to Evelyn's contacts, Jessica had vacated her apartment 2 weeks earlier after discovering that Robert's financial landscape had been reduced to a garnished salary and a retirement fund sealed behind a court order. The $850,000 condominium deal had collapsed. The engagement ring, $14,200, Tiffany & Company, sat in a drawer, somewhere a monument to a future that would never arrive. The woman who had called me to announce she was taking my husband had, upon learning there was nothing left to take, simply disappeared. Judge Margaret Vance presided with the measured calm of a woman who had seen the wreckage of 1,000 marriages and retained her faith in the machinery of justice. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and spoke in the unhurried cadence of someone whose authority required no volume. Evelyn presented the evidence systematically: the financial transfers, the 401k withdrawal scheme, the real estate fraud, the documented dissipation of marital assets, the text messages, the photographs at the Aspen Ranch. She referenced Colorado's equitable distribution framework under Title 14 of the revised statutes and argued that the court should consider the totality of Sarah's contributions to the marriage, financial, domestic, and professional, including the unpaid labor that had built Robert's medical practice from a stack of student loans into a profitable enterprise. She was precise. She was relentless. She did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. Robert's attorney attempted to argue that the asset transfers were consistent with normal marital spending. Evelyn produced the Tiffany receipt and the condominium purchase agreement. The argument did not survive contact with the evidence. The ruling was comprehensive. The family home was awarded to me along with primary physical and legal custody of both children. Robert was ordered to continue paying the mortgage and to provide monthly child support and spousal maintenance deducted directly from his paycheck through an income withholding order. His visitation was limited to alternating weekends, supervised for the first 90 days by a court-approved professional. The 401k was preserved intact, its equitable division deferred to the final divorce settlement. The trust established by Harold and Edith was acknowledged by the court as separate property outside the scope of marital asset division. Then came the moment that cracked me open in a way the entire preceding ordeal had not managed to. Dr. Clara Bennett, the child psychologist appointed by the court to evaluate the children's well-being, delivered her report. She spoke in the careful, measured language of a professional who understood that every word she said would be entered into the record. Chloe, she explained, had experienced significant emotional distress following the disclosure of her father's infidelity. But the source of the deepest harm was not the affair itself. During the week, Robert was still living in the house. In the days between Jessica's phone call and his departure, Chloe had picked up her father's phone from the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. She had read the text messages, the ones where Robert called me the stupid gatekeeper, the ones where Jessica mocked the Aspen furniture, the ones that laid bare his plans to abandon the family and liquidate everything I had protected. My 13-year-old daughter had absorbed all of it, and she had said nothing. For weeks, she had carried the weight of her father's cruelty in silence, shielding me from knowledge she thought would destroy me, not realizing that the weight was destroying her instead. Clara recommended ongoing therapy and a structured reintegration plan, emphasizing the need for stability in the children's primary residence, with me under the standard established by Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 14-10-124, which requires courts to determine custody based on the best interests of the child, including the emotional ties between the child and each parent, and the demonstrated willingness to facilitate a positive relationship. Judge Vance also ordered that Jessica was prohibited from any contact with the children for a minimum of 90 days based on Clara's clinical recommendation. In the hallway outside the courtroom, after the gavel cracked against the bench one final time and the clerk called the next case, Chloe came to me. She did not walk. She ran the way she used to run toward me at elementary school, pick up full speed, arms open, trusting that I would catch her. She threw herself against me and buried her face in my shoulder, and the sound she made was not crying, not exactly. It was the sound of something breaking free. "Mom," she said, her voice muffled against my jacket. "You are not the gatekeeper. You are our home. You have always been our home." I held her. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the wooden bench in the corridor because my legs could not support both her grief and mine at the same time. Ethan climbed up beside us and pressed his small, warm hand against my arm, and he did not say anything because he was 10 and did not have the words, but his hand said everything. And I cried. For the first time since that Thursday dinner, I let the tears come, not for the husband who had betrayed me, not for the marriage I had lost, but for my daughter, my brave and broken girl who had tried to protect her mother by swallowing her father's poison in silence. The tears were warm. They were the first warm thing I had felt in 2 months. Robert walked past us in the hallway. His footsteps slowed for a fraction of a second. He looked at the three of us on that bench, his wife holding his children in the corridor of the courthouse, where he had just lost everything a man can lose, and he looked away. He did not stop. His footsteps continued down the polished floor, growing softer, growing smaller, until they were absorbed by the noise of the building and the indifference of a Tuesday afternoon. 6 months later, the house did not look the same. It did not feel the same. It did not smell the same. I had removed every curtain Robert had chosen, heavy dark the color of a man who preferred rooms that felt like offices, and replaced them with white linen panels that caught the morning light and held it. The living room wall, the one visible from the front door, was now the color of pale lemon. Robert had vetoed that shade 3 times over the years, calling it cheap and unserious. I painted it myself on a Saturday, while Chloe held the tape and Ethan supervised from the couch with a glass of lemonade. When I stepped back and looked at it, really looked at it, with a smear of paint on my cheek and a roller in my hand, I smiled at a wall for the first time in my life. That color was mine. Nobody had approved it. Nobody needed to. The career I had built in the shadows of Robert's practice stepped into its own light. A financial management firm in downtown Denver offered me a full-time position based on 15 years of experience running a medical practice's books, and the salary they named was more than I had ever earned. I sat in the interview and described my qualifications without once mentioning my husband's name, and the hiring manager said, "We have been looking for someone with exactly this skill set for 2 years. Die." The skills that Robert had dismissed as housekeeping were worth $95,000 a year to people who understood their value. As the court-appointed trustee of the Whitfield Family Trust, I drove the children to Aspen twice a month. Harold and Edith were waiting on the porch each time, and the first thing Harold did was hand Ethan a fishing rod, and the first thing Edith did was take Chloe into the kitchen to teach her how to make cornbread from the cast-iron skillet that had been in the family since 1952. The oak table still stood in the center of the cabin, scarred and solid as ever. Nobody was going to throw it away. I discovered things about myself that had been buried for 15 years under the weight of someone else's preferences. I liked chamomile tea in the evening, not the dark roast coffee I had brewed every night to keep myself awake for Robert's bookkeeping. I liked waking up at 8 instead of 5. I liked silence. I liked reading novels in bed with the lamp on as long as I wanted, without someone sighing about the light. These were small freedoms, ordinary as breathing, and each one felt like finding a room in my own house that I had forgotten existed. Some nights I still woke at 3 in the morning and reached toward the other side of the bed. My hand found cool sheets and empty space. The absence was not always comfortable, but it was mine to fill or to leave open on my terms and my time. I would lie there in the dark and listen to the house settle around me, and in the morning I would make chamomile tea and sit by the window and watch the sun climb over the rooftops, and the quiet was not loneliness. It was room. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that Robert was renting a 1-bedroom apartment near his practice. Jessica had left when the money dried up, packed her things, and disappeared into a new zip code without a forwarding address. Robert's monthly obligations, mortgage, child support, spousal maintenance consumed most of his income. The man who had planned to buy an $850,000 condominium was eating takeout in a studio with a view of a parking garage. When I heard this, I did not smile. I did not feel satisfaction. I turned the page of the book I was reading and continued from where I had left off. Thanksgiving came around again, and this time we drove to Aspen. All of us. The gravel road was dusted with the first snow of the season, and the blue spruce trees stood like sentinels on either side, and the cabin appeared at the end of the lane, with smoke rising from the chimney and warm light glowing behind every window. Harold met us at the door with sawdust on his flannel shirt, and Edith behind him holding a pie that smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar and every good thing that endures. That morning, before the turkey and the cornbread and the chaos of a family reclaiming its center, I walked down to the small mountain market at the base of the valley to pick up cranberry sauce. The store was quiet, a handful of locals stocking up for the holiday. I was reaching for a jar on the lower shelf when I saw him. Robert was standing in the canned goods aisle about 15 feet away. He looked older than 6 months should account for. His hair had gone gray at the temples in a way that used to look distinguished, but now just looked tired. He wore a cheap down jacket, the kind sold at big box stores, the kind he once would have mocked, and he was holding a single frozen dinner in his right hand. His eyes found mine, and something passed across his face. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of regret. He opened his mouth as though he might say something, an apology, an explanation, a plea. I looked at him the way you look at someone you once knew in another life, someone whose name you remember, but whose significance has faded to the thinness of old paper. I gave him a small nod, the kind you give a neighbor you recognize, but do not know, picked up the cranberry sauce, and walked to the register. My heart rate did not change. My hands did not shake. I did not think about him again until that evening when I told Martha the story over the phone, and even then the telling took less than a minute, and by the time I hung up, I had already forgotten the details. That night, the oak table held everything that mattered. Harold carved the turkey with the same knife he had used for 40 years. Edith passed the cornbread. Chloe told a story about a boy at school who had tried to impress her by solving a math problem on the board and gotten every step wrong, and the entire table laughed the kind of laughter that fills a log cabin and bounces off hand-hewn beams and settles into the wood like warmth. Ethan ate 3 servings of mashed potatoes and fell asleep on the couch with his head on a pillow Edith had embroidered in 1985. I stood at the head of the table and served the cranberry sauce with the antique silver spoon, the same one I had gripped in my palm on that Thursday night, the one whose cold metal had bitten into my skin, while a stranger's voice dismantled my world through a speakerphone. The spoon was warm now. The firelight from the stone hearth caught its surface and turned it the color of honey. It was heavy in my hand in a different way, not the weight of control, but the weight of something inherited, something protected, something passed down. I set a portion on Chloe's plate, and then on Ethan's, and the spoon caught the light again, and the light was good. Outside, the snow was falling on the mountains. Inside, the fire was burning. The table was full. The chairs were occupied by the people who had chosen to stay, who had earned their seats, not by blood alone, but by labor and loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to let a good thing be destroyed by a careless man. I sat down in my chair at the head of a table built by hands that trusted me, and I ate my dinner in the home that I had saved. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know a woman who needs to be reminded that her strength is not invisible, that her years of sacrifice built something real, something no one can take, please share this story with her. Subscribe so you never miss a new story, and always remember that it is never too late to reclaim your own table, your own home, your own life. Thank you for listening.